about an hour. That's with opening statements plus all the witness testimony. That's not getting into everyone's questions at each once.
For everybody, we're just waiting for the ranking member, and then we'll start. Not for the record. Subcommittee will now come to order. I ask unanimous consent the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder to everyone, again, please keep your microphone muted unless speaking. And if I hear any inadvertent background noise, I'll request a member please mute the microphone. To insert a document into the record, a reminder to please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Now I recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to today's Aviation Subcommittee hearing titled Aviation Noise, Measuring Progress in Addressing Community Concerns. Before I begin today, I want to wish all my colleagues on the subcommittee a happy St. Patrick's Day. And now I'll turn to today's hearing. At one time or another, all of us on the subcommittee have heard from constituents concerned about noise from airports and aircraft. In my district, Painfield Airport, Snohomish County logged over 2,100 noise-related comments in the January of this year alone. Studies from the Federal Aviation Administration, the NASA Langley Research Center, and others have found that noise from airports and aircraft can have negative effects on residents' physical and mental health. These studies have also documented the impact of aviation noise on schools and businesses located near airports. This subcommittee takes aviation noise seriously and is focused on finding meaningful solutions to this persistent issue. The 2018 Faa Reauthorization Law included several provisions aimed at reducing and mitigating aircraft noise. The law was a victory for community advocates and other key stakeholders working to reduce the adverse impacts of airport and aircraft noise. As Congress prepares for the next Faa reauthorization, this subcommittee must evaluate how the FAA implemented provisions from the 2018 law and identify ongoing challenges. For instance, there are questions about whether the metrics used by the FAA to measure the impacts of aviation noise accurately portray the effects of noise on communities. So prior to this hearing, I invited all members of Congress to submit written statements for the record highlighting priorities and issues of importance to their constituents related to aviation noise. I want to thank my colleagues who have submitted testimony on this issue and remind everyone the record is open until April 1st. The issue of aviation noise is not just an annoyance. It's a public health issue, it's an economic issue, it's an equity issue, and certainly a quality of life issue. A disproportionate number of communities negatively impacted by aviation noise are historically disadvantaged communities. And since the 1970s, community advocates have raised the issue of noise with lawmakers and federal agencies in hopes of protecting public health and noise-sensitive locations like schools and churches near where aircraft operate. The subcommittee must ensure community advocates and the general public continue to have a voice in the FAA's ongoing efforts to alleviate aviation noise. For example, public participation must be included in the development of flight corridors based on performance-based navigation, or PBN. PBN is just one of many of the elements of the FAA's ongoing next-gen process designed to improve the management and efficiency of the national airspace. By providing more precise flight paths for aircraft, PBN will offer significant economic and environmental benefits as it continues to be implemented, but also may concentrate noise emissions for certain communities. Congress and the FAA must work with local communities to improve PBN implementation while continuing the realization of other next-gen capabilities. And nearly 1 year ago, this subcommittee held a hearing on innovation in the U.S. airspace and how emerging airspace entrants and new aviation technologies offer potential societal, safety, and environmental benefits. The aviation sector continues to develop new methods for limiting and mitigating aircraft noise. Technological improvements in engines, alternative propulsion systems, and airframes have already led to reductions in aircraft noise. The question before us today is, what more can Congress and the industry do to foster these improvements? Congress, federal agencies, stakeholders, and the industry must lay the groundwork to meet these challenges that communities will face 10, 20, even 30 years down the road. We've already seen the effects that drones and other small unpiloted vehicles can have on communities. The next emerging technology is advanced air mobility, or AAM aircraft, commonly known as flying taxis, which the AAM industry plans to introduce into the national airspace soon. So I'm encouraged by the prospects of these technologies and interested to hear how the FAA and manufacturers are looking at potential noise impacts for communities when these aircraft fly. In fact, working with my colleagues, Subcommittee Ranking Member Garrett Graves and Representatives Titus and Balderson, along with others, I recently introduced HR 6270 to create a pilot program to help communities plan for AAM deployment into the NAS. Part of that planning process may include a description of efforts to reduce the adverse effects of aviation noise related to these aircraft. Congress must be forward-looking in dealing with the problems of today while also preparing for the problems of 2050. So we're going to turn now to our witnesses. Just a heads up before we get to other opening statements. We'll have two witness panels to further discuss aviation noise issues. The first panel will include government representatives from the FAA's Office of Environment and Energy, the Office of Airports, and the Air Traffic Organization. The GAO, or Government Accountability Office, is also here to discuss their reports on FAA's progress to limit and mitigate noise aircraft. The second panel includes representatives from airlines, airports, manufacturers, and a community-based association concerned with this issue and working to find solutions. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on the progress made since the enactment of the 2018 bill and what steps Congress needs to take to prepare for the 2023 reauthorization bill to build on that progress. So while the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Law included multiple provisions to help alleviate aviation noise, there are still ways to improve the implementation of these provisions and address our constituents' valid concerns. Thank you, and I look forward to everyone to participate in this discussion today as we try to tackle these issues in a collaborative manner. With that, I'll turn now to the ranking member, Representative Graves of Louisiana, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing today. I think it's important that we look at data when we look at issues like this, and there's a really great data set that shows the progress that's been made. In 1970, there were 7 million complaints about aviation noise, 7 million. Yet in 2018, that number dropped to 430,000. So it went from 7 million complaints in 1970 to 430,000 in 2018. Keep in mind, Mr. Chair, that the number of actual flights increased significantly during that period of time. So the good news is that we're moving in the right direction. Advances in aviation technology, we have seen safer aircraft, we have seen quieter aircraft, we have seen greater performance, greater convenience. And as with anything, Mr. Chair, as you know, there are pros and cons, there are trade-offs. And as we move forward, we've got to make sure that we continue to take into consideration absolutely the complaints, the concerns that are raised by those that are affected, but also take into consideration the benefits of commercial air travel, of general aviation that has just had a tremendous impact on this country, on the growth and the convenience, on the ability to improve quality of life, business, seeing relatives and other things. As you mentioned in your opening statement, as we move forward, there's just been extraordinary advances in technology and advanced air mobility and unmanned aviation systems that has the ability to continue this incredible trend of dropping the number of noise complaints, of improving convenience, improving performance, and options for consumers across the United States, for citizens across the United States. Mr. Chair, recently the Department of Defense worked with the National Capital Region in evaluating complaints related to aviation noise, specifically looking at helicopters. Pretty amazing outcome of their analysis. Between January of 2018 and August of 2021, so between January of 2018 and August of 2021, there were in excess of 6,200 complaints, 6,200. However, half of them were from the same person. I'm not sure if it was the pilot or who, or if this person works, but half of them came from one person. Another 1,128 of the, I remind you, 6,243 were from another person. In fact, 63% of the complaints were just from two people, and 89% of all of those complaints were from the top 10. Not to discount anyone's concerns, but I do think that it's important to take that into consideration as we move forward and make sure that we're solving problems, that we understand the gravity of concerns as we move forward. Today we have a number of witnesses, but one is the CEO of Joby Aviation. And I really look forward to hearing from him talking about the opportunities, the advancement that is going to be available as a result of some of the technologies that they're pioneering, the improved experience for consumers and American citizens across the country, that some of the amazing innovation in advanced air mobility and in unmanned systems are going to provide citizens of our countries and citizens around the world. Once again, improving convenience, improving performance, improving safety for American citizens. So within the realm of the possible and plausible, I look forward to hearing more about progress achieved and how the future of noise will be much quieter as innovations advance, and how Congress can be helpful to ensuring additional gains in this area. So, Mr. Chair, I again want to thank you for holding the hearing and look forward to hearing from our witnesses today.
Thank you, Representative Graves. The chair recognizes the chair of the full committee, Representative DeFazio of Oregon.
I thank the chair. Ranking Member Graves already talked a little bit about the extraordinary number of flights compared to earlier, and the noise issue. But we've got to look to the future, where we're looking at perhaps 10 billion passengers in 2040, 90 million flights. And this is going to have an impact. I'm particularly interested in the testimony we'll hear about new technologies, bypass technologies, other things that relate to engine design or the hull and configuration of the airplane that can further mitigate noise. And I'm pleased that we have the CLEAN program, and we are making money available and doing research and moving in that direction. The other the other issue has been with next gen and performance-based navigation. The FAA did a pretty miserable job of communicating about this with communities. With Mike Capuano, former member of the committee, I sat through a number of meetings with the FAA. And, one question we had, which never really ever got answered, was, would it be possible just not to run the same PBN every day over exactly the same place every day of the week? And, could they be dispersed or lateral tracks? And I think this is something that hasn't been, I know it's expensive and time-consuming to develop alternatives to one approach, but I think that's something that hasn't been fully explored by the FAA. And then, of course, we will hear some criticism of their outreach thus far, although it appears that they're putting in place new parameters that hopefully will do a better job of listening to people in the impacted communities. And then the mitigation on the ground, the use of AIP funds. I'm pleased that we did, through the IIJA, make available more funds through AIP, which could be used for, soundproofing, noise barriers, acquiring land in flight paths or future flight paths, so as to mitigate the problems. I'm looking forward to hearing from a range of witnesses on what the solutions will be or could be as we move forward, so that we continue to make progress. It's great that, Ranking Member Graves talked about, one particular area and the complaints by just a few individuals multiplied, but I've been in other cities where it is way more widely dispersed and doesn't just involve a few individuals. And we've got to deal with that as we continue to assist the aviation sector in its future growth. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We'll now turn to our witnesses. We'll be hearing testimony from witnesses on 2 panels today, with each panel followed by questions from members. So on the first panel today, we have Kevin Welsh, who's the Executive Director of the Office of Environment and Energy at the FAA. Accompanying Mr. Welsh is Beth White, Senior Strategist for Public and Industry Engagement at the Air Traffic Organization, the FAA, and Mike Hines, Manager, Office of Planning and Programming, Office of Airports at the FAA. Mr. Welsh, I think, will be giving the testimony. Ms. White, Mr. Hines, and Mr. Welsh will all be available for questions. And then after Mr. Welsh's testimony, we'll hear from Heather Kraus, who's a frequent visitor here at the committee and the Director of the Physical Infrastructure at the Government Accountability Office. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll turn now to Kevin Welsh of the FAA for your testimony. Without objection, your full written statement will be included in the record. Since that is the case, subcommittee requests you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mr. Welsh, you may proceed.
Good morning and thank you. Chair DeFazio, Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to speak with you today about the Federal Aviation Administration's role in reducing the impact of aircraft noise exposure. The FAA's core mission is to provide the safest and most efficient aerospace system in the world. We are also committed and work closely with stakeholders to address the environmental impacts of aviation, such as climate change, local air quality, and noise. With respect to noise, the FAA's first actions to address noise were in the early 1960s, and we've continued to take action and address this issue seriously in the decades since. Over time, with quieter aircraft, new operational procedures, and land use planning measures, the country has seen a dramatic reduction in aircraft noise exposure. Since the 70s, the number of people living in areas exposed to significant levels of aircraft noise declined from 7 million to around 450,000 in 2019. At the same time, the number of passengers increased from 200 million per year to nearly 1 billion per year. So we've seen an overall reduction in noise contrasted with the steady growth in air traffic and passengers. This is important context for where we are today. We do not share this information to minimize the ongoing concerns that aircraft noise has on communities and their experiences today. Instead, it is both to note the track record of improvement in the sector and highlight that with the improvements made to date, further improvements have become increasingly more challenging. Addressing the noise concerns from one community or neighborhood will often result in noise impacts to another. At the FAA, we're not standing by, and instead have increased our efforts to address aircraft noise exposure and engage with stakeholders and communities. As we have long emphasized, successfully addressing aircraft noise requires collaboration and cooperation among all aviation stakeholders, including air carriers, airports, manufacturers, and communities. And we will continue to increase our collaboration to better address the issue. With respect to technology, reducing aircraft noise at the source, the FAA is working closely with aerospace companies through the Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise Program, or CLEAN, to accelerate the development and introduction of new technologies that will reduce noise emissions and fuel burn. The CLEAN program has already led to the introduction of quieter technologies in today's aircraft fleet. Another important tool is the FAA's Airport Noise Compatibility Planning Program. Since 1983, the program has provided more than $10 billion in funding to more than 250 airports to support changes in local land use planning, sound insulation, aircraft noise abatement procedures, and other measures. In recent years, we have also significantly increased the FAA's community engagement on noise issues. Our community engagement framework is based on 9 regional teams, each with a regional administrator, an air traffic service center, and other FAA officials who work with community engagement officers to work directly with communities to listen, share information, and address noise concerns. This is a top issue for our regional administrators, and we are carrying out efforts all across the nation on a daily basis. In line with this increased engagement, we have also launched the FAA's Noise Portal. This Noise Portal provides information on aircraft noise and a place to submit noise concerns and complaints directly to the FAA. In late 2021, we initiated a comprehensive review of FAA's noise policy. This review will identify updates and improvements to the FAA noise policy based on the latest data and information available. This is a wide-ranging review and will include evaluation of the day-night average sound level known as DNL, as well as the 65 DNL threshold. We will also explore whether and under what circumstances supplemental noise metrics are appropriate. Most important, this review will include stakeholder outreach and engagement as part of the process and before recommending any policy changes. Finally, I would like to also note that nearly all the directives in the Noise and Environmental subtitle of the Faa Reauthorization Act of 2018 are complete, and we remain committed to completing the rest in a timely manner. Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, Chair DeFazio, members of the subcommittee, in summary, the FAA is and will continue to be fully committed to addressing the effects of aviation noise on communities and working closely with all of our stakeholders and elected officials to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. Ms. Krause, you may proceed for 5 minutes.
Chair Larson, Chair DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work on aircraft noise. While the aviation system moves millions of people and goods each day, the noise generated from aviation can severely diminish the quality of life for nearby communities. Such noise can expose residents to various negative effects, such as disrupted sleep and health issues, and spur community objections to airport operations and continued growth. Mitigating and addressing aviation noise involves multiple stakeholders. This includes affected communities, airports, aviation manufacturers, and aircraft operators, as well as FAA, who manages the air traffic control system and helps to fund airports. Despite trends towards quieter airplanes and fewer people exposed to noise, community concerns about noise have persisted. In particular, FAA has been changing flight paths around airports as part of its efforts to modernize the air traffic control system with performance-based navigation, or PBN. PBN allows for more precise flight paths that reduce flying time, fuel use, and emissions. Because of these new and more precise routes, noise is likely to be concentrated over a smaller area, meaning that while fewer people may experience increases in noise, people directly under PBN routes may have more persistent noise. Affected communities and members of Congress have raised concerns about FAA's implementation of PBN, including whether it provided timely and adequate information about potential noise effects to the public. My testimony today is based on our recent work examining FAA's efforts and focuses on 1, how FAA engages with communities to understand and address noise concerns before and after implementation of PBN, and 2, areas for improvement. In response to rising community concerns and legal challenges, FAA increased its outreach efforts. For example, at locations where PBN was first implemented, FAA only conducted briefings with airport officials. Later, FAA expanded its outreach to members of the public, including holding public workshops and webinars. However, community stakeholders across the country told us that the information FAA provided on potential noise impacts was not clear enough to understand planned changes. In particular, our analysis showed that the metric FAA uses to assess noise impacts does not provide a clear picture of how changes in flight paths or activity may affect noise levels at a given location. This metric, the day-night average sound level, or DNL, takes into account multiple components of aircraft noise to create a single metric. Because of this, the same DNL level may be associated with vastly different numbers of flights at a given location. For example, small numbers of relatively loud operations can result in the same DNL as large numbers of quieter operations. Because FAA relies on DNL for communicating noise impacts, communities may not have the information needed to understand how the number of flights over each location will change. After implementing PBN, FAA primarily conducts outreach through community forums established to address the noise concerns and provide some guidance on this outreach. However, some forums were unclear on how to engage productively with FAA and the extent to which they could expect FAA assistance in proposing changes or other measures to address noise concerns. To address these various issues, we have recommended that FAA, 1, identify additional metrics for assessing noise impacts of new flight paths, 2, use additional tools to clearly convey expected impacts, and 3, improve guidance for communities on effectively engaging with FAA. FAA concurred with our recommendations and told us that they plan to act on them by the end of this year. Taking actions like these will also be critical as aircraft operations evolve and increase. In particular, emerging technologies such as electric aircraft may present opportunities to reduce noise with quieter operations, but they could also present new noise challenges if they operate at a higher frequency and closer to populations. In closing, FAA has an ongoing responsibility to balance the growing demand for aviation capacity against their noise effects on communities. Although FAA is unlikely to eliminate all noise concerns, improved information, expectations, and communication will enable communities, airports, airlines, and FAA to better anticipate and more meaningfully engage on noise issues. This concludes my statement. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'll start with member questions. First off, for Ms. Kraus, in your report, the GAO report references communities that feel the FAA is simply, quote, checking a box in post-PBN implementation engagement. And you recommend the FAA provide clearer information to communities on what they can expect from the FAA. Is this a problem of the engagement process, or is this an issue internally in the FAA about the ability to incorporate input from communities?
I think what we had found is that offering clear expectations to communities on what they might get in terms of assistance from FAA and what that process should look like. And so that's where we had recommended to FAA to kind of clarify what communities should expect and how that process might work.
Mr. Welsh, what have you done about that recommendation, and understanding that this might be yours to answer, or one of or Ms. White or Mr. Hines?
Yeah, thank you. I'll turn it to my colleague Beth White for this.
Yeah.
And thank you for the question. One of the things I think we're referring to is really the level of expectation at the roundtable, through that roundtable process with airports. And the recommendation was to provide some clarity really on that. We were working on a form that we have that we have on the website, kind of talking about resources, how we best engage with roundtables, how we best engage through the regional process. We've reached out through our community engagement officers, through our regional administrators, and updated some of that guidance on our website very recently. It is a challenge in looking at each one of these situations at a roundtable, what we may or may not be able to do with each one of those organizations, but we're doing our best to ensure that we kind of manage to the realm of the possible. Heather just mentioned managing expectations. That's where we're really starting, is trying to make sure folks understand what we can and can't do, and continue to have a dialogue.
So maybe this might be for you. What role is the regional ombudsperson playing in this outreach?
Thank you very much for that question. The community engagement officer is also the regional ombudsman. They have the designation of regional ombudsman. And I want to first actually thank Congress for the funding that is really a resource that we use here for hiring those individuals. They've become the focal point for our community engagement efforts in each one of the regions. There is a community engagement officer in each region. They are the representative that works with the airport noise officer. And if there is a leadership position at an airport roundtable, they are responsible to be the collection point for the discussion about what happens at that roundtable, the concerns that may be raised by the community. And we have restructured that process internally. So when we look at a new flight procedure or an airspace change, that community engagement officer is part of that process. They sit on that full working group, and they are there to raise the concerns that they have heard in those roundtable meetings and with those airports about community concerns. And if there is a question about whether or not they are not being heard, they have access to the regional administrator, and they have access to me at headquarters to help elevate the issue.
Thank you. Back to Ms. Kraus. In the report, you discussed, I believe in your report, you discussed identifying alternative metrics for sound, creating sound envelopes and such. Are there alternative metrics?
Yeah, I think, the FAA had actually developed a report identifying some of those alternative metrics, and our recommendation is to, that no one metric is going to give a full picture of the noise impacts, but that, looking at DNL along with some other metrics where appropriate could be useful. So things like time over or time above or flights above, to get a sense of how much time folks are exposed to certain levels of noise, or how many aircraft they're exposed to, as well as sound level exposure. So there are different metrics with different trade-offs to consider.
Yeah, Mr. Walsh, do you have comments on that and how FAA might approach those alternative metrics?
Yes, and actually really agree with the comments that my colleague from GAO just made, because number one, we currently today can use supplemental metrics and do. And number two, as we've talked about today, the increased concentration and number of flights has sort of changed the noise experience. So something like the number of flights above in a given period of time may be a really important supplemental metric. But I think most important is to underscore that all of these metrics have trade-offs. The current DNL metric absolutely has trade-offs, but the other metrics do as well. So in our current noise policy review, these are the types of things that we're looking at to make a recommendation on how to proceed.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just turn my mic off for a moment and get direction on who's going to be next on Q&A. Hold on a second. All right, great. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Representative Graves of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Welsh, FAA has a very complicated task, and again, has a impressive safety record in regard to just the number of accidents and incidents, safest way to travel. The FAA is really charged with, I guess, the safety and the efficiency of the national airspace system. Mitigating noise is something that you look at, and you diligently work to mitigate that. But can you talk about sort of the core mission of the FAA in regard to efficiency and safety, and sort of how that is your top mission?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member Graves. Absolutely. Without question, that core mission of safety is the top priority of the agency. And so when it comes to particular noise procedures, we are not going to trade off any amount of safety for noise. That said, in many cases, the gains can go hand in hand. But when we're talking about maybe it being more challenging today to identify improvements, it's because we're talking about greatly increased numbers of flights in very complex airspace. And there are safety issues to be considered, and maybe ones that are not obvious to the general public. So these are things that we take into account, and we work very carefully when we're looking at any changes to address noise considerations, because absolutely safety is our mission and our top priority.
Thank you. And you touched on this a little bit, both in the chair's question and the one I just asked you, but I first need to put the statistics I gave earlier in the right context. I put them in the wrong context earlier. So there were, in 1970, there were 7 million folks that were exposed to high levels of aviation noise, and that was reduced to 430 in 2018. Can you talk a little bit, and again, I know you touched on this a bit, but directly, can you touch on the tools that the FAA has used to have such a profound reduction in the number of people exposed to high levels of noise whenever you have had an extraordinary increase in the total number of flights during the same time?
Yes. So the number, by far and away, the number one reason for that reduction over time is the improvement in technology. With every generation of aircraft and engine, we see noise improvements, although again, it's becoming more limited and more challenging as we proceed. Number two, noise abatement operational procedures that are in place around the country. And three, really importantly, the noise compatibility program run by FAA's Office of Airports that I mentioned as well. Those are really some of the three, the big components. And then, of course, along with all of this, kind of working with communities, particularly in the last years, on ways to further mitigate noise exposure.
Thank you. Ms. Krause, looking forward, I talked in the opening statement, as does the chair, about incredible technologies in aviation space, UAS and AAM. Considering the metrics or sort of the data points that we use now to measure noise impacts, what do we need to be thinking about moving forward on how that needs to change, reflecting new technology?
In terms of new technology, I think thinking ahead and better, now better understanding the types of noise these technology might create and the types of impacts, because they, will be, if projected as the industry is talking about, could be operating at a much higher frequency and closer to population. So I think first understanding what types of noise that they create and the noise impacts, and then having that inform sort of standards and development of where these aircraft will operate.
Thank you. I want to go back to FAA, to Mr. Welsh for just a minute. Mr. Welsh, I was looking at some of the other data I mentioned in my opening statement about the military's working with the Washington area on the helicopter flights. Looking at National Airport, at Ronald Reagan National Airport, in 2019, 2 complainers accounted for 22.3% of all the complaints. That was in excess of 20,000 complaints a day, which is in excess of 20,000 complaints over the year, in excess of 50 complaints a day. I'm not sure what these people do for work, but I am curious, understanding the FAA didn't collect the data points and doesn't oversee military operations. How do you use the noise complaint data to inform your role in mitigating noise, and do some of these outlier complaints that I referenced in my opening statement and now, does that obscure the work?
So first of all, in the data that we collect, we see a similar trend. About roughly 45 to 50% of the complaints are repeat complaints from the same individuals. However, our primary reason for taking, we take these complaints and respond to them, so to provide information where we can to address the concern. So that's our kind of number one role we use. And now that we have this noise portal system that I mentioned, where we can better track the data, we're not using that to necessarily drive make policy changes based on any individual complaints, but we will use it to look at trends over time or maybe identify hotspots if we do see a spike in concerns in a particular area. So that would be, the idea would be to use it as a, over time to kind of consider trends, but it's not really the primary driver of our policy, particularly given some of the issues that you pointed out.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. Yield back.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Full Committee, Representative Fazio of Oregon, for five minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Welsh, can you give us an example of where community engagement has gotten, proposed changes or enacted to mitigate problems in a particular community?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll turn this to my colleague, Beth White.
Thank you for the question, Representative Fazio. We have had pretty meaningful engagement on a number of different fronts with different communities. And I can actually point to some successes in San Francisco, Oakland area, in the LA Basin, and most specifically San Diego just recently, talking to the airport there. They worked collaboratively with stakeholders and the FAA and developed some solutions to some challenges, noise challenges in the area. I would say that in not every instance is there a possibility for there to be a solution. We have all mentioned that, we're not removing noise, we're moving noise. So in some instances, there are the operational opportunity to move a flight path, move a waypoint, adjust the procedure in a way that doesn't affect the safety and efficiency of the operation. But just because we don't have that opportunity in every area doesn't mean we are ceasing that engagement. And we remain optimistic that there may be things as we evolve too that may change that equation. I think really what we're seeing is the best way forward is getting the communities and the airports and others engaged in the process when it begins. So not going back and trying to deconstruct an existing flight path, but having that meaningful engagement on the front end of a project. And we're really seeing that with the Metroplex efforts in South Central Florida and some of the ones that came along at the end of our new enhanced community engagement. We have in almost each instance in Florida, we have areas where the community brought to us as part of the process, working with the airport or again, community roundtables, we were able to incorporate positive flight changes that impacted the community in a positive way. So I think that's really where we really want to head strategically in the future is working with the front end of the project to engage more with the community prior to it getting to a design and implementation.
Okay, that seems like some progress. Looking at Ms. Cross, at your testimony and your graphics, I find it's really extraordinary on your page 7, how it seems to me that the DNL is really a pretty indiscriminate measure when you see you can meet the standards with you've got one really loud plane. You can have, I can't even count on the bottom graph. I guess it's 1,000 at 84.4 decibels, but because of the dispersal, you still meet 65 decibels. This seems to really cry out for a new measurement, a new way of measuring things.
Yeah, that's why we are recommending that FAA consider additional supplemental metrics to DNL. I mean, changing DNL, as FAA is talking about reviewing, would have some implications to consider in terms of whether you change the metrics or change the threshold. There's regulatory and sort of budget considerations. But regardless, we think like no one metric really does give a full picture. And so other metrics, as we were talking about in terms of, looking at the number of flights above or the time above in terms of exposed to certain thresholds of noise, looking at a number of metrics will give communities a better understanding and FAA a better understanding of potential impacts.
Okay, and you also were somewhat critical of the engagement. We've been hearing about improved engagement, forward engagement, pre-engagement before developing routes. Have you seen that progress?
In terms of following up on our recommendation, I know FAA has said that they are looking to update some of their guidance on the additional tools and information that might be available by the end of the year. So we look forward to taking a look at those steps that they're taking in response to our recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Representative Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, recognized for 5 minutes. Just waiting on Representative Fitzpatrick. All right. All right, as Representative Van Dyne. Okay. Representative Steele.
Thank you very much.
You're
Mr.
recognized,
Chair, and
you're recognized for 5
Ranking
minutes. Go ahead.
Great. The residents of Orange County and of my district care a lot about our airport. In addition to the convenience of having a world-class airport close to home, my constituents are also deeply concerned about the impacts noise and pollution having on our community. Today, I want to focus, as I have before, one of the need for greater community engagement by the FAA with our constituents who are most impacted by airport noise. And we went through all these hearings with the FAA for a long time, going through that the Metroplex implementation. FAA has limited the community engagement officers' interactions to only acting with communities that have formed formal roundtable. This means many in my districts are excluded from working on solutions. Mr. Welsh, it is my understanding that the law currently does not limit how the FAA Ombudsman offices interact with local communities to address their concerns. Communities in my district have shared with me that FAA Ombudsmen are not engaging with their communities outside of a formal roundtable. What does the FAA needs to help fuel these critical conversations at a local level in a timely fashion?
Thank you, Representative Steele. I'm going to hand this to Beth White.
Thank you, Representative Steele. Yes, in looking at communities around airports, we have found that it is the most effective way to use the historical place for communities to talk, and that is usually an airport and an airport-sponsored roundtable. And that is really because each individual community may have a desire to have a plane in one area versus another. It doesn't become that larger consensus conversation that the community is making a decision. It would be an individual community. Now, I understand that the Orange County John Wayne Airport does not have a roundtable. That does not preclude the communities to bring a proposal if they would like to see something addressed to the airport, and the airport can bring it to us if that roundtable does not exist. I will tell you that we were very successful in Northern California in putting together and producing a community forum to talk about in a post-Metroplex world, how the operations are working, bring the stakeholders together, and then have a question and answer period to talk about what we might be able to do. We have had discussions about a similar type of meeting in Southern California, which would allow questions and answers on these issues with your constituents. We're confirming and working with the community and the stakeholders now, but that would be another alternative that would offer. But meeting with individual communities doesn't have a productive effect because each community has a parochial interest in where they'd like to see the aircraft move.
Ms. White, actually, we have a roundtable with city council members from Newport Beach and Costa Mesa and City of Santa Ana and Tustin. So we are having, it's not just one community meet the groups, but this is a roundtable that, constantly asking, but those meetings been very hard to set up, except that has to go through my office to do it. When I was supervisor, we used to try to have a meetings, and then we had one meeting since I became Congress. So you know what, let's have a little more discussions after this hearing, and love to talk to you and love to introduce you to Roundtable if you don't know anything about. And then how can Congress improve the office of Ombudsman to truly make them community engagement officers?
Well, the community engagement officers, as I mentioned before, are an integral part of our team. They are the central focal point for all of the issues, and they coordinate with our air traffic organization. They coordinate with our airport district office, our Office of Communications, our regional administrators, our service centers. They are the point in bringing the issues that they see in the community and through their engagement back to the team. They work, again, as I mentioned, with each one of the regions. They report up and make sure I'm aware of issues so I can bring those to the headquarters attention. I feel like they are really helping us integrate and increase our engagement efforts.
Okay, so you mean that you have officers?
Representative's time's expired, and you can follow up with Ms. White. We're going to turn to Representative Carson of Indiana. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just briefly, I'm curious, noise mitigation impact on air traffic efficiency. Our committee has strongly supported efforts to improve the efficiency of air traffic management with performance-based navigation. This has also improved fuel efficiency and benefits to our environment. But I don't think we adequately anticipated the increase in noise level with the concentrated flight paths. How can noise mitigation be improved without diminished effectiveness for the air traffic improvements or even fuel efficiency? And where are the approaches that have worked well that could be utilized in other locations?
Thank you, Representative. That's a great question, and also one of the more difficult questions that we are currently addressing is particularly regarding that trade-off of efficiency and noise procedures, because we really do, when we look at these issues, need to look at them on a case-by-case basis if we are considering changing procedures to address noise concerns. So I don't have a specific example for you right now. Perhaps one of my colleagues does, but it is an area that we are very focused on and that we actually, we review. We will look at the fuel burn associated with changes. We'll consider those trade-offs when we're looking at these procedures, because as you know, we are also very focused on opportunities to continue to reduce emissions and fuel burn from flights throughout the national airspace system. And I'll just pause to see. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything to that. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, second question, disproportionate impacts. Many of my colleagues have pointed out, unfortunately, that some of the communities impacted the most by the worst of these noise problems are disadvantaged communities. Are noise mitigation actions being carried out in a way that doesn't double down on disproportionate impacts on disadvantaged communities?
Thanks, Representative Carson. That's also a really good question, and I think I'll start by saying, with President Biden's top priority on environmental justice and equity, and that really has flown down through the FAA. It's one of the top focuses of our Deputy Administrator, Brad Mims, and so we are absolutely, when we undertake environmental reviews and work on the issue of aircraft noise, we're absolutely focused on how we can improve environmental justice and equity in those decisions. That's not to say that we're doing it perfectly and that there's not a lot of work to do. There's, in fact, yes, absolutely a lot of work to do to make this a more equitable, topic and to reduce impacts on disadvantaged communities. But it is certainly among our top priorities as we look at this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Mr. Welsh. The Trenton Mercer Airport, the flight path is right over my district, and my constituents are directly impacted by an airport that is not even located in the state that I represent. TTN is currently seeking FAA approval for a quote improvement project. I believe that this is an expansion project because among other factors, it will make 2 outdoor and partially used gates into 2 indoor fully used gates, which will clearly lead to a significant increase in traffic. This project includes building a brand new terminal building over existing wetlands to house all 4 gates. And obviously my constituents, as am I, are rightfully concerned about the increase in noise and environmental impacts of this expansion. I believe that a cost-benefit analysis would show that TTN's goal is to increase traffic. So my question, sir, for Mr. Welsh, why doesn't the FAA require and publish a cost-benefit analysis for airport projects?
Thank you, Representative Fitzpatrick. I'm going to turn this to my colleague, Mike Hines, from the Office of Airports.
Thank you for that question. Well, the FAA does require benefit cost analysis projects if the sponsor is seeking funding in excess of $10 million for capacity projects. We understand this project to be a replacement project, as you said. And what we look at is what is the purpose of the project and is it justified? And it's our understanding that this is a replacement terminal project, replacing what is currently there that will meet the needs of the forecast demand, which was included in the environmental assessment. When you replace an old aging facility, there are certain requirements that have to be met for today's standards. For example, the ADA, so the American Disability Act standards have to be met. So there's provisions in the new terminal for those. Transportation Security Administration guidelines have to be met, or standards have to be met. So a lot of times there's additional space just for those requirements. We also understand that they're taking 2 aircraft that are essentially operating on the apron and putting them on a contact gate. And we think that does a couple of things. It provides higher level of service. It provides security and safety for the passengers. Anytime that you have passengers have to walk out of a terminal onto an apron and onto an air stair, there's safety concerns for the passenger, and there's certainly security concerns for the airport.
Mr. Hines, this project calls for making 2 rarely used outdoor gates and a fully operational in-terminal gates. So would you agree that by moving these 2 gates indoors and making them fully operational can cause an increase of annual impoundments in airport traffic?
So the way we typically look at projects is we'll do the forecast and is the project meeting the forecast requirements? What you're talking about is induced demand. And we believe that the forecasts that were developed for this project are sound, and they will meet and the facility that's being proposed will meet those requirements. The desire for an aircraft or an airline rather, to fly into a certain airport is a lot based on their business plan and really where their routes are currently structured.
Now, TTN has submitted traffic numbers that do not show their full growth over the last decade. Another thing I'd like you to address. The FAA employment data cited that this project uses 9 years of growing numbers plus 2020 figures to hide the pattern of growth. So could you tell us why the FAA would allow 2020, an outlier for air travel, to be included in the FAA forecasted data?
Well, it's my understanding that the forecasts were published in 2020, but used 2019 numbers. And of course, we saw a decline in numbers through COVID, and the numbers, at least in the current draft TAF, are catch back up in a couple of years and show modest growth through the planning period.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Chair. Now recognize Representative Kahele of Hawaii for 5 minutes.
Hello, Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and thank you for leading this issue that is of critical importance to my constituents here in Hawaii, which is aviation safety, aviation noise, and environmental impacts. Mr. Chairman, the number one issue in Hawaii is helicopter commercial air tour activities and the associated noise throughout the state, which has been a topic of legislative and regulatory interest at both the federal and state level for over 30 years. On the island of Hawaii, in 2017, the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park experienced 16,520 commercial air tours a year, second only in the nation to the Statue of Liberty. That's an average of 46 air tours every single day, 365 days a year, over one of the nation's most treasured national parks. And I really believe that Americans that go to our beloved national park should be able to experience them in its quiet and pristine condition. However, air tour management plans, first passed by Congress in 2000, 22 years later, have still not been implemented at Haleakala National Park or Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. According to the FAA, there are a total of 49 air tour operators conducting tours in the state of Hawaii. And at the core of regulation in Hawaii is the Hawaii Air Tour Common Procedures Manual and the air tour management plans over our national parks. My question is for Mr. Welch. The last time the Hawaii Air Tour Common Procedures Manual was published was in August of 2008. It is lived beyond its useful life and needs to be updated by the local flight standards district office. There have been significant changes to population density and land use since then, and I believe that the FAA and our local FFDO need to implement new policies and procedures for rotary wing and commercial air tours because the current situation in Hawaii is unsustainable. So far, there has been very limited community input and lack of urgency in updating this manual. So my question is, do I have or can I get an update from you on both the air tour management plan for Hawaii Volcano National Park in Haleakala? And do you have an update on the Hawaii Common Air Tour Procedures Manual? And moving forward, do I have your commitment in working together with community organizations and neighborhood boards here in Hawaii through the local flight standard district office to update new policies and procedures and ensure that they are not written exclusively by the local FSDO and air operators?
Thank you, Representative Kahele. Just starting with the last one, yes, you have our commitment on that score. The common, as you mentioned, the Common Procedures Manual is something that needs to be updated, and the FAA's flight standards organization is planning to update the procedures associated with that and modernize how we do that, and will absolutely include public engagement with the communities in Hawaii before doing that, while doing that. The second topic on the air tour management plans, the FAA and the National Park Service are currently developing air tour management plans for 24 national parks. We expect to complete approximately 12 to 15 of those by this summer. However, for the parks in Hawaii, it will take a bit longer to do because of the environmental considerations involved, the number of operations, and considerations regarding tribal engagement. So we're planning for that to take a little bit longer, but that's in part due to like I said, the level of helicopter traffic there and all of the stakeholder interest and consultations. But we are hard at work on that, and we are very closely working with the National Park Service on those air tour management plans. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Welsh. I appreciate your commitment on that. And mahalo, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. We now recognize for 5 minutes a representative from Minnesota, Representative Stauber.
Thank you, Chair Larson and Ranking Member Graves, for holding this very important hearing today. And I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I won't have any questions, but I just want to make a few comments. And I agree with many of my colleagues today in the sense that noise mitigation really is a community issue. It is one that should be addressed at a local level with the help of federal resources. There are plenty of folks who will never be happy with any amount of effort that industry, the community, or the airport itself puts in to mitigate noise and disturbances. However, I would like to highlight an airport in my district that is truly doing it right. The Duluth International Airport has been an outstanding member of the community and a proud home of the 148th Fighter Wing. They have been incredibly engaged with the community and proactive in voluntarily commissioning a Part 150 noise study. This helped them identify current and future noise impacts on the surrounding community and develop proactive solutions that support thriving air commerce, are supported by the public, and enable the long-term presence of the 148th Fighter Wing. After various public workshops, numerous public advisory meetings, and engagement with the surrounding localities, the Duluth International Airport has cemented itself as a proactive and engaging partner in our community. This is all to say that airports and industry work really hard to mitigate impacts to their neighbors. They are important job creators to their regions, and we must continue to enable them the freedom to work with their communities in ways that fit their needs. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Chair now recognizes Representative Williams of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, y'all, I have people tuning in my neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta and the cities of East Point and College Park to listen to this discussion because it is so critically important to our communities. Noise and other emissions from our transportation sector are major issues in Georgia's 5th Congressional District. And y'all, I know firsthand because my house is close enough to the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the world's busiest and most efficient airport, that planes fly over my neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta every 60 seconds. I've timed them and they start before daybreak and continue past midnight. So noise issues are a big part of why I'm the no neighborhood nuisance Congresswoman. Last month, I introduced bipartisan legislation to fund sound barriers for neighborhoods in my district that have too long had to deal with the highway noise. I'm deeply committed to cleaner and quieter skies, and I'm working on legislation with Chairman Larson to benefit the communities where our airports reside. And today, I'm glad that we're bringing the critical issue of aviation noise to the subcommittee so that we can get the answers we need to help all of us live peaceful lives in our homes, no matter our zip code, and allowing our airports to continue to thrive. Mr. Welsh, as you know, the GAO recommended the FAA employ additional communications tools to convey the impacts of noise to communities. I understand the FAA plans to update their guidance on community outreach by the end of the year. In the meantime, has the FAA begun to identify communications tools or key strategies for engagement? And just let us know where things currently stand for everyone that's tuning in back in my district in Atlanta.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Really appreciate your comments on this topic. And I'll say just a couple of things and then hand it to my colleague, Beth White, who focuses on this topic every day. But we're certainly not waiting to do the updates of our guidance. We're doing a lot of things in real time to help the public. I mentioned the noise portal. We're responding to complaints faster than we ever have before, with an average of 14 days response. We've put new technology on our website to make information more readily available. And of course, we're engaging with communities all over the country. So I'll turn it to Beth to maybe highlight a couple more examples, but really appreciate those comments.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and Representative. And I think that just highlighting again, the challenge is that when people look out and see traffic on the road, they know exactly what we're talking about. They can see the congestion. They understand, how things get into knots. When you're looking up in the sky, it is a whole different situation. So really, for us, developing more effective tools to help communicate how and why the National Airspace System works and what the challenges and constraints are is so important. And we are working, as Kevin mentioned, we're not waiting. We are developing things that we're putting on our website. We are creating webinars. We are creating other videos and graphics that help us to do that. When we meet with communities, we are very prescriptive in making graphics that show what we're trying to visualize in ways that folks can understand, seeing maps that have communities on them or roadways or something that gives them that indication. We have a very vast website. We just recently added an artificial intelligence chatbot to help folks find those questions, those answers quickly. As Kevin mentioned the portal, and we're working diligently to continue to have those updates as fast as we can, but a constituent may have just a single question. And if they go to our website, it might be difficult to find that information. So we wanted to put that in place, not to be a barrier, not to be a robot between us and the public, but to help them find information that we may have there. We've added frequently asked questions. We have links to a system that actually visualizes and animates procedures so they can see exactly where they fly. That chatbot will be moving into Spanish in the next year, so we can, again, be more accessible to the community. And we have visualization tools we're working on for the website to even further help explain how and why the airspace operates, which I think is the most important point, is effective communication.
Thank you. On this committee, we must be doing all that we can to reduce aviation noise and other emissions. And our next generation aircraft need to be cleaner and quieter. Chairman Larson and I are currently working to update and introduce a House companion of the Aero Act, which would invest in sustainable aviation fuel. How would investments like this and investments in other aircraft improvements ultimately benefit communities living by our airports?
Thank you. That is really exciting to hear, and it's an area that we're very focused on in the Office of Environment and Energy at FAA with the CLEAN program that I mentioned in my testimony. And these changes, technology changes, as the aircraft enter the fleet with new technology, we're talking about lower emissions and noise and improvements for the community. And you mentioned sustainable aviation fuels, which are perhaps one of the most promising developments in terms of utilizing existing infrastructure.
Mr. Welsh, as exciting as this topic is to me, I am out of time, and I am going to have to continue this conversation offline and report back to my district. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yield back. The chair recognizes Representative Van Dyne of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I agree. I mean, this can actually be a very exciting issue to some, especially if you're living right outside the airport and you're affected by that noise. I was mayor of the city of Irving, which DFW Airport's right in the middle of the city, and I can tell you this is a really very important issue to a number of people. But airports are a critical economic driver at the same time in many of our communities, and in my district, it is no different. DFW Airport is actually one of the largest in the world. I understand the airport noise to be predominantly a local issue, but it often involves multiple stakeholders who have a distinctive authority and share responsibility concerning noise reduction and mitigation. Being a member of this community is important for all stakeholders to help address these issues. At DFW Airport last summer, the airport had to adjust flight paths on arrivals and departures due to runway work. Beforehand, the airport reached out to community members to mitigate concerns and address the problem before all the complaints could come in. So if people were notified of it, they knew that it was going to be short-term, they knew why it was happening, and I think they were much more accepting of it, and I think communication is key there. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here, and I have a question for Mr. Welch. The 2018 FAA reauthorization bill established Aviation Noise Ombudsmen to serve as a public liaison for questions and complaints related to aircraft noise. Can you tell me what the average response time is in addressing a community's concern or issue?
Sure. Thank you, Representative, for that question. I will just, as I just previously mentioned, in terms of the complaints we receive, our average response time is about 14 days right now. And then I'll turn it to my colleague Beth White if she has anything additional to add.
No, I would just say again, in some of the engagement then with the regions, whether it's the airport roundtable, our teams are working on a daily basis in communication with those roundtables, with those airports on any upcoming agendas or meetings that they may be having.
Okay, I appreciate that. In an August 2020 report, the GAO noted that for those stage 3 aircrafts that could meet more stringent noise standards, and that retesting of those aircrafts without modifications could cost up to $1 million and take between 2 to 3 years to complete. Does the FAA have plans to make the retesting and recertification of aircrafts when no modifications are required? Do you have plans to make that more expedient?
Thank you. Well, we don't currently have plans to do that, but the recertification, of course, wouldn't change the absolute noise level. And what we've found is that those stage 3 aircraft are increasingly in smaller numbers in the fleet. So actually, our efforts are really focused on making sure that the latest technology gets into the fleet. And in fact, just recently at the International Civil Aviation Organization, we worked on a commitment to look at the existing noise standard and consider updating it over the next 3 years.
But is there any way that we could expedite it to actually save? I mean, some of it is bureaucracy, some of it is regulatory, red tape that we've got to work through. If you don't have plans, I would suggest, I mean, it's one thing to look at new technology coming in and to motivate that. But I think with the existing technology that we have, if there's a way to expedite it, you might want to consider that. How accurate and reliable are FAA's noise models? Does the FAA's noise models have the capacity to accurately assess noise from new airspace entrants, such as small and large drones and electrically powered aircrafts?
So we have a AEDT model that is very good at addressing noise for conventional aircraft, but as you mentioned, the new entrants, the new types, we need to improve our tools, and we're in the process of doing that. And part of that is understanding the noise that those vehicles make, because as we all know, these vehicles look different, they sound different, they operate differently. So we are in the process working very closely with industry on measuring noise and updating our tools to be able to better understand their noise exposure.
Okay, I appreciate that. Ms. Krause, can I ask you, how can the FAA prepare for these new entrants when it comes to noise issues? So they're looking at it, but what specifically can they do?
I think starting to understand and gather data on the noise impacts of these aircraft as they get into service and there's data available. I think that will be important, as well as starting to think through locations of where these aircraft might operate and whether FAA or how FAA might have a role in where those are located. Those are some areas to consider.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure what my time is. I don't know if we started it, but.
It's right now.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thanks a lot. Chair recognizes Representative Payne of New Jersey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Welsh, aviation noise is populated areas, in the populated areas is a problem and can seem like an unavoidable, an unavoidable one given airplane flight paths to airports. However, I understand that FAA is making progress in the implementation of Next Gen, which would upgrade the nation's air traffic control systems to make use of enhanced capabilities in GPS communications satellites. The system can also take advantage of new population data to identify new areas of concentrated populations. How would routing planes to best avoid new population centers reduce aviation noise? And how can advances in Next Gen be used to achieve that goal?
Thank you, Representative Payne. So there are certainly opportunities to do so with the new technologies in place and looking at the impact on communities. As I mentioned, perhaps one of the most significant challenges is the trade-offs that happen in these dense urban populated areas where we have noise trading off from one community to the other. And so over the last few years, we've been working in Boston, for example, with the airport and MIT on exactly that, evaluating how we can use existing technology, procedures, and understanding of noise exposure to make improvements and identifying specific solutions. So there's opportunities there, though it's important to underscore that it is challenging, and there are a lot of trade-offs that need to be considered among all the stakeholders.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus, I understand that as a part of the aircraft certification process, noise generated by airplane engines is one of the criteria that is examined. From your testimony, it appears that while today's aircraft engines have the potential to reduce noise, there is always room for advancement. How could future aircraft engines be designed so that the noise would be further dampened?
I think there are efforts underway to look at electric engines, which hold some promise to addressing some of the noise issues. But I think in terms of the ways that industry is talking about how those might be used, they could be at a very high frequency and sort of closer to populations. And so as you're looking at some of those new technologies or how the aviation industry is transforming to new and different uses, it'd be important to engage with affected communities and understand the impacts as they evolve.
Thank you. And in terms of the potential of electrifying the engines and that technology, how far along? Do you have any idea?
There are some testing going on of vehicles now. FAA may be able to speak to some of the actions they're taking when it comes to standards and certification efforts.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Representative Payne. The chair recognizes Representative Lynch of Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Mr. Welch, let me just say, it is hard to reconcile your testimony with the testimony of Ms. Kraus. And I tend to believe her. As you know, I represent a big part of the city of Boston and 21 towns and 2 other cities, Brockton and Quincy, in the 8th Congressional District in Massachusetts. And we have a hellacious problem with aircraft noise in my district. And I find it hard to believe that only 450,000 people across the country have been complaining about aircraft noise. I think I've got that many in my own district, just based on the calls I get and the calls that go into Logan Airport. And I just want to say, in terms of your outreach program, with all due respect, the last FAA meeting that the FAA agreed to do in my community, my district, we had about 800 people show up, very angry about the non-responsiveness of the FAA. So, I don't want to be rude, but you got a lot of work to do in terms of doing real outreach and real listening to the people that we all work for. And that's the truth. I don't live next to, my airport isn't as big as Hartfield Jackson or Dallas Fort Worth, but I live close enough to the airport that I can tell whether the passengers have their trays in the upright position. It goes right over my home, but there's no hope for me. I live so close to the airport. But there are a number of communities that are, in the suburban areas of my district, such as the town of Milton, that it's become unbearable for many of the families there to enjoy their yards and go outside. The noise is just unbelievable and extremely unhealthy. So we are working with MIT to try to figure out some ways to mitigate the damage, but the damage is being done. And noise has become worse because of the next gen RNAV system, which has a vector that all these flights go over the same homes each and every day, 365 days a year. And that's a system that you're pushing. And so having looked at this, and I'm a co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus. So I deal with this every single day. There are things that you can do to help. And I like the idea of the PBN and looking at case by case basis. In my district, you know, we're right on Boston Harbor. But the layout of the runways, which was established back in the 1930s, goes over the homes, not over the water. So I've been trying to convince the FAA that, you know, we can realign these runways so that we maximize over the water landings and over the water takeoffs to save the people from the harm that they're experiencing right now. And I need your help on that. You know, when Logan Airport was laid out, there was very little air traffic in the 1930s compared to now. And the population wasn't as densely settled. And the aircraft back then had very low thrust, so they needed to take up into the wind. That was much more important than today's situation. So I'm just looking for some cooperation from the FAA to deal with these problems. Come to my district, have a meeting with us. Come to, you know, we'll go to Milton High School again. And I guarantee you there'll be at least 800 people waiting to talk to you. But you've got to do much better with your outreach. And we've got to be much more serious about using, you know, rather than just waiting for new technology. We have answers that are available now, but we got to work together. We all work for these people, the public. You know, the FAA has been one of the most unresponsive public agencies that I deal with and that my constituents deal with. And that's not a good reputation for the FAA to have. So I just ask you I've consumed all my time, but you got to do better. You got to do better. And I'll meet you halfway, but you got to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lynch. Just make sure the FAA, I won't call on the FAA to respond, but I'm make sure the FAA responds to Mr. Lynch's offer. I'll now recognize Representative Stanton of Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. During my time as mayor of the city of Phoenix, the FAA unilaterally altered flight paths out of Sky Harbor International Airport. This was done without proper notice or public outreach to the city or to the surrounding neighborhoods. Prior to those changes, the airport had fewer than 25 noise complaints a year. With the altered flight paths, air traffic over city neighborhoods increased by 300% and noise complaints skyrocketed to 12,000 a year. Ended land use and development decisions that I, as a member of city council and mayor in the city, had made over decades based on the air traffic routes that had been in place for decades. Despite our best efforts to work with the FAA, we eventually had no other choice than to fight these changes in court, and we won. The court recognized the FAA's lack of engagement with the city and the affected communities and noted that, quote, the FAA found a potential for controversy, but did not notify local citizens and community leaders of the proposed changes as the agency was obligated to do so, much less allow citizens and leaders to weigh in, unquote. This resulted in the implementation agreement between the city, the historic neighborhoods nearby the airport, and the FAA to return departure routes to their pre-2004 locations. Now, fast forward a few years, in October, the FAA Regional Administrator for the Western Pacific region notified my office that the FAA was considering possible changes to the procedures at Sky Harbor and that a working group was formed to study concept related to the airspace. I have questions regarding this issue. Mr. Welsh, my understanding is that this working group will not reopen or in any way alter the implementation agreement with the city of Phoenix. Is that correct?
Thank you, Representative Stanton. I do not know the answer to that question today, so I'd have to follow up with you. I'm not sure that my colleagues do either, but I'll turn it to Beth in case she does have information.
Can anyone else answer that easy question? Is that correct that there will not be an alteration to the implementation agreement with the city of Phoenix?
You know, I understand that there's going to be a full working group. It was set up for pre-COVID around December, and then they had to readjust that. It's being rescheduled. But I also would prefer, Representative, to get back to you on that answer and not speak to legal matters without confirming.
Okay, I appreciate a swift answer to that very fair question. Hard lessons were learned from the FAA's failure to conduct the proper environmental studies and public outreach before implementing the 2014 changes. As the working group moves forward, community engagement and dialogue will be paramount. However, I am concerned that the FAA has not yet communicated with the public on this group or the purpose. What is the FAA's plan and timeline for community engagement related to this working group with communities in the Phoenix metropolitan area? Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Representative. We will have to follow up with you. I apologize for not having a specific answer, but I also want to acknowledge your point about the lessons learned and the fact that what we did in Phoenix and have learned from it has changed how we do business. And so we will absolutely follow up with you and commit to that type of engagement.
I appreciate that. Look forward to hearing that answer. I'm glad to hear that there were lessons learned for all involved. How will the FAA ensure that any future flight paths in the Phoenix area will be done with complete stakeholder and community engagement? Mr. Welsh.
Thank you. I'll hand that one to Beth.
Thank you, Representative. And I want to echo what Kevin said, that I do think that the situation in Phoenix and as we developed the number of the Metroplex projects was definitely a turning point and a lesson learned for the FAA on outreach and what we needed to do and how we needed to do it sooner and in different ways, in ways that we really were doing a better job of explaining what we're talking about with the purpose and need really of these procedures as we modernize the national airspace system. As we just talked about a minute ago, there is talking about a full working group. We have been engaging with the airport, the region has on this very early. We are working on a communications and community engagement strategy with the airport, with the local offices there to ensure that we are reaching out to the community, taking those lessons learned and ensuring that we are getting out effectively and early.
One final point, and that is this. I'm a mayor. I come to this job in Congress with a mayor's hat. We work really hard at the local level to develop land use plans around our airport. We have an urban airport. We are blessed with an urban airport. We make land use plans around the airport to best facilitate the balance between protecting neighborhoods, particularly historic neighborhoods, and the needs of a growing airport. And what the FAA did was kind of upended that balance. And we hope in the future that you will take in better account the important land use decisions that local officials have made to best implement aviation in our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Congresswoman Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C. for 5 minutes. Just a moment. Just, we have members who are signed up to speak who are not on screen. So I'm going to give folks a moment to get back on the screen if the witnesses will just be patient. Okay, that's concludes questions for panel one. I want to thank the witnesses from the FAA and the GAO. We'll have some follow-up questions for you all, and we'll look forward to getting prompt answers to those, as well as prompt answers to the questions that were asked of you by members today. So with that, we'll move on to panel two, and thank the witnesses on panel 1. And as panel 2 comes up on the screen, we'll let folks know for the record, we'll be hearing testimony from witnesses on panel 2. I ask the witnesses on the panel to please turn their cameras on, keep them on for the duration of the panel. The witnesses on panel 2 are Sharon Pinkerton, the Senior VP of Regulatory and Legislative Policy at Airlines for America, Frank R. Miller, the Executive Director of Hollywood Burbank Airport. He'll be here on behalf of Airports Council International North America. David Silver, who's the Vice President for Civil Aviation of Aerospace Industries Association. Emily J. Tranter, the Executive Director of the National Organization to Ensure a Sound, Controlled Environment. And Joe Ben Beavert, the CEO of Joby Aviation. I want to thank you for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since your written statement has been made part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And we'll hear from the witnesses in the order that I've introduced them. So we'll start with Sharon Pinkerton of Airlines for America. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Airlines for America to be part of this important discussion on reducing noise. We've made significant progress working together in reducing noise impacts. In fact, since 1975, the number of people exposed to significant levels of aircraft noise has dropped by 94%. At the same time, the number of people traveling has more than quadrupled. Now, we recognize that despite this tremendous progress, more work remains to be done. And that's why you have the airline's commitment and our commitment to continue to work on both reducing our aircraft noise footprint and
Ms. Pinkerton, this is the chair. You're not showing up on the screen, so you can check your camera, please. There you are. Thank you very much. Now I can see you. We could hear you. We couldn't see you. Thank you.
Very good.
All right, go ahead. Just continue where you were.
Thank you. We've made good progress on both the noise side, but also the emissions side as well. The fuel efficiencies we've achieved over the last many decades equate to taking 27 million cars off the road each year. As you know, last year in coordination with the administration, we announced our mutual goals of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, as well as having 3 billion gallons of cost competitive sustainable aviation fuel available by 2030. Now, you might be asking why I'm talking about climate change at a noise hearing, but that's because these two goals are really interdependent and sometimes in conflict with each other, which we'll talk more about later. But with that context, what I'd like to do today is talk about what actions carriers are taking to reduce noise. Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't state the obvious, and that's that COVID initially devastated our industry, bringing it to a standstill. The last 2 years have been rocky, but there's no doubt that less noise was generated. Fortunately, domestic operations are recovering. International operations are still lagging. Most experts don't expect our operations to return to 2019 levels until 2023 at the earliest, maybe 2024. But if there's a silver lining to COVID and this demand drop-off, carriers not only parked planes, but we retired our oldest and noisiest fleet. Carriers have spent almost $60 billion in the last 5 years on quieter and more efficient aircraft and engines, as well as other technologies. And those airplanes are 50% quieter than planes we bought just 10 years ago. That's important because, as you've heard the FAA say, reducing noise at the source through improving technology is the most effective way to reduce noise. Last year, and that's also why airlines have been leading advocates for more resources spent on research and development programs for noise reducing technologies. Last year, we helped spearhead the Green Aviation Coalition with all stakeholders, urging Congress to devote more resources to FAA's Clean and Ascent programs that you heard the FAA discuss. So we've got technology and operations that airlines are using to drive down noise, but standards play a key role as well. And as a result, A4A and our members are key participants in the process at the International Civil Aviation Organization as they develop more stringent noise standards for new aircraft. The Stage 5 standard, which has been effective since 2018, requires new aircraft to be 35% quieter. And as the FAA mentioned, ICAO has already turned their attention to developing the next more stringent standard. In addition, airlines are engaging with the FAA as they evaluate the 65 DNL metric. We don't have a position on whether the metric should be changed or other metrics should be used, but we're very open to having a data and evidence-driven discussion about the issues that FAA outlined. Finally, community roundtables. They're absolutely a critical tool in the toolbox for addressing noise. As you well know, Congress asked the FAA to step up their engagement in community roundtables. A4A and our carriers supported FAA in doing that. We've stepped up our own engagement as well to be at the table. We recognize that even when next-gen procedures result in overall reduction in noise, noise can shift or be concentrated over certain flight paths, creating legitimate concerns. That's why these roundtables are such a critical element of balancing the sometimes conflicting goals of noise and emissions reductions. We want to accomplish both. To wrap up, we've made significant progress in reducing both noise and emissions, but we know more work remains to be done. We need to utilize all the tools in our toolbox if we're going to achieve our shared goal, which is a safe and efficient air traffic control system that supports a vibrant aviation system that creates excellent jobs, connects people, keeps our supply chain moving, all while minimizing our noise and emissions footprint. Thank you again for this opportunity. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes now Mr. Frank Miller on behalf of Airports Council International North America. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I apologize. Thank you, Chairman Larson and Ranking Member Graves, for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I am Frank Miller, Executive Director of the Hollywood Burbank Airport in Southern California. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about the efforts, progress, and remaining challenges in addressing community concerns related to aviation noise. Turning from the national perspective to the specific experiences I have had as Executive Director at Hollywood Burbank Airport in addressing community concerns related to aircraft noise, I would like to highlight recent outreach efforts and measures that will be initiated in the near future. In 2018, Hollywood Burbank Airport held 2 nighttime public hearings in Burbank, where community members provided comments relative to their own personal experiences with aircraft noise and the Southern California Metroplex flight path changes in March of 2017. In response to community concerns voiced in these earlier meetings over SoCal Metroplex and the FAA's implementation of a air transportation system, the Hollywood Burbank Airport and Van Nuys Airport convened the Southern San Fernando Valley Noise Task Force to investigate the issues that were previously raised. The task force consisted of a set of 8 voting members from the cities of Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, and Los Angeles. The task force also included 5 non-voting members representing the offices of Senator Feinstein, former Senator Harris, Congressman Schiff, Congressman Sherman, and Congressman Cardenas. Staff from the FAA, the Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena Airport Authority, and Los Angeles World Airports attended the task force's meetings as technical advisors. The task force conducted 7 meetings over an 8-month period. At the final meeting, which lasted more than 8 hours on May 6 and May 7, 2020, the task force successfully completed its objective of developing a set of recommendations to address community noise issues related to aircraft operations from Hollywood Burbank Airport and Van Nuys Airport. Most of the recommendations were directed to the FAA, but Hollywood Burbank Airport is moving forward on items that are specific to it. Most significantly, after a few more months of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, Hollywood Burbank Airport will conduct a new Part 150 noise compatibility study. This study will measure current and future aircraft noise levels and their associated effects on the surrounding communities. It will outline actions that will reduce or minimize aircraft noise over sensitive areas. It will establish land use guidelines to address compatibility between the airport and its surrounding communities. It will identify areas where aircraft noise is present and encourages land uses that are compatible. And it will develop a comprehensive noise compatibility program for the airport. In conjunction with the Part 150 study, Hollywood Burbank Airport will convene a Citizens Advisory Committee to help the community stakeholders understand the process and the final analysis. It is currently anticipated that the committee will include Burbank, Glendale, and Los Angeles residents nominated by their local government officials. The committee will function until the Part 150 study has been completed and submitted to the FAA, which is estimated to take approximately 8 months. Hollywood Burbank Airport will respectfully request that Congress provide additional funding for the FAA's Part 150 program to support Airport Improvement Program grant awards that help with noise mitigation for non-compatible land uses and sound installation. In an ongoing effort to address the impact of aircraft noise, Hollywood Burbank Airport continues to monitor noise complaints reported by residents in the surrounding communities. To provide nighttime noise relief through a voluntary curfew, Hollywood Burbank Airport has a standing request to all commercial airlines that they refrain from scheduling departures or arrivals between 10 p.m. and 6:59 a.m. Additionally, Hollywood Burbank Airport utilizes WebTrack, a community-facing platform that provides flight information to the public and track noise and inquiries. Community members can submit a noise inquiry through WebTrack or contact a toll-free 24-hour noise concerns hotline. Hollywood Burbank Airport also publishes a quarterly noise monitoring report on its website that documents the noise impact boundary of the airport as defined by federal law. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to speak to you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. David Silver of the Aerospace Industries Association for 5 minutes.
Chairman Lawson, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to appear today. My name is David Silver, and I serve as the Vice President of Civil Aviation for Aerospace Industries Association. For over 100 years, AIA has advocated for America's aerospace and defense companies and the more than 2 million men and women who are the backbone of our industry. For decades, aircraft manufacturers have invested in many successful initiatives that have reduced public exposure to aircraft noise while still allowing the industry to grow and deliver huge mobility benefits to our society. For example, today's aircraft have cut noise levels in half compared to those made between 1980 and 2007. This significant change is a result of newer, quieter engines, as well as airframe and other design improvements. According to the FAA, the number of people exposed daily to significant aviation noise in the US declined by roughly 94% since 1975. AIA appreciates this committee's past leadership in supporting research and development that has greatly contributed to the improvements seen to date, such as higher bypass ratio engines, more aerodynamic airframes, and improved engine nacelle treatments, all developed cooperatively with industry and all improving the noise environment. Despite previous improvements in aircraft technology and airport operations, our industry realizes that the work is not done. AIA's members continue to make significant investments in technology that will further reduce the aviation-related noise near airports. AIA is committed to working with international bodies, federal agencies, and Congress to better understand, reduce, and mitigate the impact of noise on these communities. Internationally, we recognize this must be consistent with the global nature of aviation. I say more about this in my written testimony, but we strongly support the International Civil Aviation Organization's balanced approach, which offers a global baseline for addressing noise issues. Domestically, effective partnerships between the FAA, NASA, and the aviation industry is critical to increasing improvement in the noise characteristics of aircraft. We believe collaborative support for aviation research and development is vital for aviation's future, and the opportunity exists today to double down on these public-private partnerships and accelerate the next generation of aircraft and engines. An example of this is the Sustainable Flight National Partnership, a cooperative effort by the FAA, NASA, and industry to accelerate the development of more efficient aircraft and engine technologies. This partnership
targets up to a 30% improvement in fuel savings compared to today's airplanes, which also delivers substantial reductions in noise and emissions. AIA member companies are exploring a range of technologies for the next generation of aircraft for introduction in the 2030s, offering improvements in fuel efficiency of 15 to 25% compared to current aircraft. Realizing these benefits will require both public and private investment in US manufacturing, especially given the impact of COVID-19 and the billions of dollars in investment being made by European governments in support of similar efforts overseas. Congress can help in these efforts by continuing to support increased funding for the FAA's continuous lower emissions energy and noise clean program to accelerate reductions in noise and other emissions in conjunction with fuel efficiency improvements, supporting and expanding the alternate fuel and low emission aviation technology grant program in the House-passed Build Back Better legislation and introduced in the Senate as the Aero Act, passing the Advanced Aviation Infrastructure Modernization Act to establish a pilot program to provide grants related to advanced air mobility infrastructure, and helping drive the development of a comprehensive long-term research agenda that supports transformational aviation technologies, leveraging partnerships between industry and government agencies, including the Departments of Transportation, Defense, Energy, and NASA. AIA applauds the committee for this opportunity to discuss the important topic of community noise and allowing industry to provide our views on ongoing research and our significant efforts to reduce both noise and emission impacts. We appreciate the support of Congress in authorizing and appropriating funds for vital FAA research that will lessen aircraft noise for existing and emerging technologies like supersonic and AAM aircraft systems. We look forward to working with this committee as we consider this policy changes related to aviation noise this year and in next year's FAA reauthorization bill. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes Emily Tranter, Executive Director of Noise. Ms. Tranter, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and share perspective on progress and tools towards addressing community aviation noise concerns. My name is Emily Tranter, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Organization to Ensure a Sound Controlled Environment, or NOISE. NOISE is the country's oldest advocacy organization representing a community perspective on aviation noise impacts. Our organization is comprised of elected officials from all over the United States, all directly impacted by aviation noise and operations. Our board alone represents communities adjacent to major airports in Minneapolis, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Louisville, and the Denver area. As you know, NextGen establishes flight tracks that become part of a complex and growing network of procedures. For the efficiency of NextGen implementation, the tracks should be designed to be stable and sustainable long-term. To that end, it is important to design tracks that will be acceptable to the FAA and community. NextGen is a transformational infrastructure investment and deserves the same due diligence and community input as any other major transportation system on the ground would warrant, as well as ensuring that this infrastructure does not cause undue harm. To be clear, we do not represent every impacted community or interest on this issue. However, our organization's engagement for nearly half a century provides a unique perspective that we believe will give the committee background on meaningful ways that have and can continue to measure the progress of addressing community concerns related to aviation noise. First, it is clear that there is no silver bullet when it comes to addressing aviation noise impacts. In our experience, Congress and the FAA have made dedicated strides towards focusing on community engagement over the last decade. However, much progress still needs to be made. These efforts include the FAA creating an Office of Community Engagement in the Air Traffic Organization and directly engaging with airport roundtables. It also includes individual members and this committee responding to constituent concerns through legislative action, funding the study of noise metrics, and by creating the Quiet Skies Caucus. While these actions are meaningful and extremely important to continue to invest in, many of the most impactful changes to noise have come from the bottom up or airport level rather than from top-down policy changes. Understanding local dynamics is vital towards finding and implementing meaningful solutions. That is to say, When you have seen one airport, you have seen one airport, and a one-sized fix does not fit all. Early and frequent communication by the FAA, the airport, and other industry stakeholders with the impacted communities through a roundtable or by other public means is, in our experience, key towards community awareness, engagement, and understanding of noise changes. Even changes that do not require environmental review should be paired with robust community outreach far ahead of any planned changes to the airspace that could impact noise. In many cases, educating and engaging local elected officials can help provide an important bridge to constituents. In others, where roundtables may be comprised of both elected and non-elected officials, direct engagement and consistent communication with those bodies is key. The engagement of local FAA personnel who do understand the community and operations has also proven valuable in many cases. Where we have seen the most progress, even if seemingly incremental, has been where tailored and transparent engagement has been put into place, and when the community is equipped with knowledge and understanding of what is and is not possible from an operational standpoint. Outside of the NEPA process, transparent and robust communication can save time and avoid unnecessary hurdles caused by community pushback when unexpected changes occur. It is important to recognize that there is a relationship between an airport and the surrounding communities, and when each is doing well, they bolster the success of the others. Thriving communities are places where a dependable workforce want to live and where people want to do business or visit. The airport is an asset to a community, but a thriving community is also an asset to the airport. Designing tracks that respect the communities they impact and do not unintentionally cause harm will foster this mutually beneficial partnership. Investment in this partnership ahead of any noise changes creates the foundation for sustainable outcomes and long-term success. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. I know the chair recognizes Joe Ben Beavert of Joby. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and the members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. It's an honor for me and for the entire Joby Aviation team. I founded Joby with a vision of creating a new form of air travel that is clean, quiet, and accessible. My passion for this work began while growing up in the California redwoods. I remember walking home from school where I experienced the beauty of the land around me. But like any child, I dreamed of a faster way to get there. I pictured myself flying in an aircraft that could take off vertically, but then transition and fly like an airplane and blend seamlessly into its surroundings. In 2009, I founded Joby Aviation to bring this vision to life, experimenting with new ways to design aircraft using electric motors and batteries. We were honored to work with NASA on pioneering projects like Leap Tech and the X-57 Maxwell to demonstrate the potential of electric flight. After years of testing and development, we were ready to commercialize this technology and started flying full-scale prototype aircraft in 2017. We're now working with the FAA as a formal applicant for type certification. I am pleased to say that we are on track to bring our all-electric piloted aircraft to market in 2024. It is capable of flying 150 miles on a single charge to move 4 passengers at a top speed of 200 miles an hour. Thanks to the foresight shown both by Congress and the FAA when they rewrote Part 23 airworthiness standards to encourage innovation, the US is out in front in this global race for aviation leadership. The FAA's decision to apply Part 23 to aircraft like ours and fully leverage the flexibility of the existing rules is critical, as it means no significant new regulation is needed. As a result, the United States leads the world in bringing aviation into the electric age of flight. In the decades to come, electric and hydrogen electric propulsion systems will allow us to build aircraft that are cheaper to operate, quieter, and bring us much closer to net zero emissions. For the sake of the planet and future generations, it's critical that the government continue to prioritize these technologies. My company is deeply committed to delivering an aircraft and a service that is emissions-free, broadly accessible, and quiet. Making aviation a part of everyday life requires a revolutionary approach to acoustics and aircraft design, and that's exactly what we've done. Our aircraft emits 100 times less noise than a traditional helicopter. During takeoff and landing, the loudest moments of flight, it's about the same volume as a normal conversation. In cruise, we're virtually silent. Thanks to the motors and propellers that we've created in-house, we've been able to eliminate the impulsive wop-wop sound that defines helicopters. And instead, we've created something that more closely resembles the sound of wind passing through the trees. Together with NASA, we've conducted a series of test flights in September 2021 to measure and validate the acoustic footprint of our aircraft. And some of the early results of that work are included in my written testimony. Looking ahead, we must be good citizens and neighbors in the communities we plan to serve. That means engaging early, listening to local stakeholders, and offering a service that is broadly accessible. Our objective is to offer flights at a cost equivalent to taxis or ride-sharing services today. In the early days, we plan to use existing airports and heliports, many of which today are underutilized. As we demonstrate the benefits of our transportation service and prove how quiet our aircraft is, we believe early adopter communities will be interested in permitting new infrastructure that is close to where people live and work. For this reason, we support H.R. 6270, the Advanced Aviation Infrastructure Modernization Act, sponsored by Chairman Larson, Ranking Member Graves, and Representative Titus, which would allow cities to begin planning for this new type of mobility before it arrives. Every major advancement in aviation began with a revolution in propulsion technology, and each time our nation has been at the leading edge of adopting that opportunity. From the early Wright brothers' flights in Kitty Hawk to the jet age. Today, we have the opportunity to lead once more, this time with a technology that not only opens the door to new possibilities, but is also cleaner and quieter than ever before. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the panel, and we'll now go to members for questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. First question is from Ms. Tranter. As part of the 18 FAA Reauthorization Law, Congress required FAA to appoint regional aviation noise ombudsmen. In your view, how would you assess the role that the ombudsman process has played? Has it improved communication, and what improvements can be made to the use of ombudsmen?
Thank you for the question. I know that the creation of ombudsmen was much anticipated by communities across the country, and the impact and investment of that position has made significant changes to, as I spoke to, the local presence of the FAA and engagement. I think there is some room for improvement in terms of ombudsmen's awareness of certain community dynamics and of a non-partial role. Not that the FAA is partial, but that ombudsmen tend, and by definition, to have that background. But I do think that it is exceedingly important that the FAA continues to try. They are trying. They are putting these things into place. And there's a lot of trial and error as they go, but there's not. But the most important factor is that these policies and positions are put into place to build on and to learn from.
Thank you. Are there specific changes to the law as we prepare for 2023 that you think we should consider?
I think the law changes should continue to invest and allow the FAA to invest in local community engagement. So subject matter experts on the ground for and on behalf of communities, whether that's through the FAA, through outside consultants or contractors. That, in I think our organization's opinion, is one of the strongest tools towards giving communities that sense that they are well represented and have the same footing as these policies go into place, or excuse me, as the new tracks go into the place, the new procedures go into place. So that investment for the FAA would be critical for them to have those tools at individual airports to respond to the individual needs.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Miller, your description of the Hollywood Burbank experience sounded very sunny, and I'm sure a lot of hard work went into that. Do you have any advice for us on any hiccups or challenges that you faced, and as well how this would apply, how your experience would apply to other airports?
Mr. Chairman, you're right, it wasn't all sunny. The purpose of the task force was really to identify issues that have been raised before, that there are certain things that we can and cannot do to provide an opportunity for the community to understand the role of the airport. And as we went through the process, we worked very closely with the FAA to ensure that the task force would be able to accomplish what we wanted. And the FAA was very instrumental in helping us convene this task force. We also made it clear that not everything that was contained in the recommendations we could commit to undertaking. There are some things that obviously can't be done. So I think it helped us at least to get out there. I know that the community wasn't always very happy with the idea that it wasn't an easy fix. And as was stated once before, we're not really eliminating noise, is how you relocate the noise impact. So there are issues that have to be discussed. Certainly, we know that we weren't making everybody happy, but I think most airports around the country want to be good neighbors. We certainly want to be a good neighbor here in Burbank, and the task force is, I think, a very important way of conveying that to the community and giving them an opportunity to participate in discussions with us. And I think it was very important to have the elected officials represented on that task force to also understand how their constituents could be affected either by getting noise that they hadn't experienced before, or being able to move the noise to a different area where it provided the least impact.
Okay, thank you. I'll have questions to the record for the other witnesses around new technologies and their impact on noise. With that, I will turn to the ranking member, Representative Graves of Louisiana, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tranter, I was asking the FAA and the GAO in the first panel about some of the distortions about noise complaints, going over the helicopter analysis done by with the Department of Defense, as well as some of the complaints coming into National Airport, and just showing the incredible distortion of numbers with the majority of complaints. For example, for the helicopter analysis, 89% of the complaints were lodged by the same 10 folks. The outliers can obscure a goal of trying to truly mitigate noise complaints or noise issues. How can we work together to help to make sure that we're doing an accurate analysis and truly working to address the complaints collectively?
Thank you for the question. Yes, noise complaints are an interesting beast in that we don't, the FAA, the United States, does not measure noise impact by complaints. It's measured by the metric. I would go back to my testimony that the engagement with the roundtables who have been endorsed by the community or who have been developed by the community, whether those be put together by or comprised of elected officials and or residents, and also other subject matter experts, those bodies, those public processes give, in our experience, the most accurate picture of the impacts on the ground and what folks are hearing. Because yes, maybe one person gives much more of an unbalanced set of complaints in a process. However, folks who are engaged, who are well educated on the issue and impacts, tend to engage with their local elected officials and with anybody that is present. In Minneapolis, there's the Noise Oversight Committee. Those are elected officials and city staff, and residents there know to interact with them and also with their elected officials in Congress and things like that. So that gives you a much more accurate picture to then respond to and address where the issues lie.
Thank you. Mr. Bevert, you win the prize for the best background. I think I'd like one of those. But I wanted to ask, so I asked Ms. Krause on the first panel from the Government Accountability Office about how we need to be thinking about noise moving forward, considering the evolution of technology and some of the innovation that you and others are carrying out. We're going to be looking at potentially aircraft that are much closer to residential and commercial areas, potentially flying at different elevations. Could you talk a little bit about how Joby is approaching it? Perhaps give us some advice on what we should be thinking about as we consider the number of flights, when we consider the different altitudes, meaning the lower altitudes of some of the aircraft that will be flying with newer technologies, and some of the flight paths, and that we're going to be potentially having vertiports and others closer to residential areas and things along those lines.
Congressman Graves, thank you so much for the question. So I think the key element here is, if you care about aviation noise, if you care about acoustics, the best thing you could do is invest in electric propulsion. Electric propulsion is a game changer. It allows you to radically rethink the design of aircraft in a really holistic way. As I spoke about, we've been able to reduce the acoustic signature of our aircraft in hover by 100-fold compared to helicopters. That is unprecedented. We've also been able to substantially reduce the noise in overflight. And the reason we've invested in this, we've spent more than a decade very, very focused on this. And the reason is, we want to be able to serve communities. We want to be able to land in a community. I'm somebody who cares very deeply about the tranquility of the place that I live. And yet I want access to the next generation of transportation. And so I want to be able to take off from where I live without disturbing my neighbors. And to do that, we've developed an aircraft which is really a game changer in its acoustic signature. To follow on, electric propulsion can enable those benefits in aircraft of all shapes and sizes, and will be really transformational as we look to the future of reducing aircraft noise across the country. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You're back.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes. A question for Ms. Tranter. One of the most consistent complaints we hear from residents who experience elevated levels of noise is their inability to speak or direct their complaints directly to the FAA. In response, this committee included a provision in the Faa Reauthorization Act of 2018 to create a formal process for addressing community concerns by establishing ombudsman in each FAA office to serve as community engagement officers. How effective have these new ombudsmen been at addressing community concerns regarding aviation noise?
Thank you for the question. I do think that it was a point of progress to have a person on an FAA personnel at each airport, at each regional, not at each airport, but at each region of the FAA that can engage and be responsive. I think that the key and what we have seen as an organization is the key is to have that person have continuity, have engagement with whatever the other stakeholders are, and understand that the dynamics there. The FAA is a very large agency. They are they have a lot on their plate to deal with safety and efficiency, and safety being, we all understand that we fly safely because of how hard everyone at the FAA works. But having the dedicated person on the ground is a great step. But we do see room for improvement in just elevating all levels of communication in terms of reading the room for each scenario, each airport, and then responding back through up to headquarters and using all of the tools that headquarters has and has put in place to then respond to the community concerns.
In your view, are there more changes that need to be made to create a more effective engagement with local communities?
Yes, I think that continued investment by Congress and the FAA into on the ground government, FAA, industry and airport engagement, more investment in terms of policy that you all would put into place, and positions that are funded, an emphasis on the need for local understanding and engagement is key, because again, all of these long-term investments into looking at metrics, into the study of noise, into new aircraft, which is all extremely vital and important, that is very long-term. And so the investment into how the FAA and Congress can support the individual local engagement, I think would be a great focus for the next reauthorization.
Mr. Miller, many airports that participate in the Part 150 program and receive Airport Improvement Program funding for noise mitigation projects find that the demand for these funds often outstrips supply. However, with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and we've just done that, airports will receive a record amount of funding for all types of airport development projects, including noise mitigation. Can you explain how critical this law will be in helping airports fund additional noise mitigation projects for their local communities? And can you specifically describe how your airport plans to use this new funding to address your community's aviation noise concerns?
Madam Chairman, certainly the funding that has been approved will be very welcomed by airports around the country, as well as here in Burbank. We rely upon it very much to be able to do the noise mitigation efforts that we know will be very crucial to our efforts to be that good neighbor, to help noise insulate homes around the airport. We will continue a program that we've had in place for some time. There has been a lapse in our efforts only because of the COVID pandemic and the lack of available funding for us. So as the funding becomes available and as we can draw down on that money, we have already set aside the matching grant dollars that we will need in order to move forward. So I thank Congress for approving that bill. I thank you for the ability to have more funding available to ensure that we can move as quickly as possible to complete the programs that we've had in place for quite some time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Burchett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Joe Ben, I'm a flagrant inventor myself, I guess, and And I appreciate everything that you've got going. I wish you were close to Knoxville, Tennessee, brother. I would love to crawl all over one of those airplanes. That just fascinates me. And I brought a picture of my mama. She actually flew an airplane during the Second World War, which is pretty cool. My daddy was off fighting the Japanese. She was doing her part for the war effort. And she lost her brother fighting the Nazis, and she was about 18 years old and flying an airplane. They were truly the greatest generation. But and I guess my question, just for anybody out there who wants to answer it, do y'all think that the U.S. can realistically achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the aviation sector by 2050 without phasing out a majority of the planes currently in the U.S. fleet? Because I know that they are older planes and probably not as efficient. And of course, I guess Joe Benton is chomping at the bit because he knows they're not electric. So I'm wondering if y'all think that's a possibility.
So I'm incredibly excited about the opportunity to utilize solar and wind and hydropower from places like Tennessee to deliver energy independence for our country and to power our aviation and our planes with electric and hydrogen electric propulsion systems that to drive the economic value into our country, into our communities. If you have an airport and you put in solar panels, all of the revenue from that energy generation accrues to the local community. If you're in Kansas and you want wind turbines, or you've got wind turbines and you power your planes, all of that revenue is accruing to your community. I think that's really, really powerful. I think that as you rightly point out, we need to drive to a zero emissions aviation future. We need to do that as aggressively as we possibly can. The best way to do that is with electric propulsion. And so we should be investing in research and development. We should be investing in manufacturing. We should be investing in things like HR 6270 to drive community planning. All of this will leave the country much stronger. Investments made today will pay dividends for decades.
Sir, if I might as well, there is no doubt that we are currently being outspent by our European compatriots, competimates, as we like to call them, in terms of these technologies. AIA has made the commitment. We are the ones who are required to design these aircraft to meet the goals of 2050. We would not lightly make that commitment unless we thought we could get there. However, it is going to take extraordinary effort on all of our parts and putting in the necessary time, research, and dollars to help us accomplish that, including, but not limited to, the engine technology, the airframe technology, but also sustainable aviation fuels, which are going to be critical for us in helping us achieve these goals.
Congressman, I'll just jump in here as representing the airlines today. Well, first of all, the story about your mom was amazing. What an inspiring story. But
she was pretty cool.
That is awesome.
I'm an unrepentant mama's boy, and I miss her and my daddy every day.
I did want to say, carriers also are very excited about the potential for electric and hydrogen. In fact, some of our carriers have invested in those technologies. I think they're critical, but they are more of a medium or longer term solution. And as you know, carriers came together last year and announced our net zero goal by 2050. We do think we can meet that, but we do think in the short and medium term, we need to be making these investments in sustainable aviation fuel. I know we've got some leaders on this committee in that space. It's very exciting, the work that's being done, but it is a public-private partnership. Airlines are committed to making that happen. Having 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel available by 2030 is no easy task, but there is funding and incentives in the Build Back Better bill that we're all very supportive of, and looking forward to working with you and your colleagues to make it happen. With respect to the planes, I don't know if you heard my oral testimony, but essentially what I said was, if there's a silver lining on COVID, it's the fact that we not only parked planes, but we retired a lot of our older and noisier fleet. and we've spent $60 billion in the last 5 years on buying newer planes. Those new planes that we bought in the last couple of years are 50% more efficient and quieter than the planes that we bought just 10 years ago. So I think we're off to a good start, but we'll look forward to
Sharon,
working together.
do you think my flight bill will come down 50%?
It's already pretty low, I have to tell you. It's already
right.
pretty low.
I don't know. My parents are Depression era. It could always go a little lower. Thank y'all so much. And then, Madam Chair, I yield back the remainder of my time. It's been a pleasure with y'all today.
I thank the gentleman. That concludes our hearing. I would like to thank our witnesses, our witness for his testimony today. Your comments have been very informative and helpful. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or information submitted by members or the witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.